And welcome everyone to our second class on the essential nectar. Let's start with prayers as we usually do. Give ourselves a chance to kind of guide our mind in the right direction. First of all, by recalling the Buddha and his amazing qualities by reciting this praise that we'll do 3 times together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do a short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge and bodhicitta. Oops. I will do that first time in English, and then we'll do twice chanting it in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shod sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sanamgi Drola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, good. Let's do a short meditation then. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, let go of our whatever distractions we might have in our minds from our day. And then I'll lead you in setting our motivation together. So again, just spend the first few minutes meditating on the breath, whatever way suits your mind. And then I'll guide you in setting motivation. And setting our motivation for tonight. Let's recall in last week's teaching how we went to the first Lamrim text, Lama Atisha's text, where in the very beginning he speaks to these three levels of motivation. And let's go through them as a way of setting our own motivation for tonight. The first level is the person of the least capacity, where there's still an attachment to being in samsara, but at least the mind is directed towards attaining good rebirths, with the understanding that when this life ends, our consciousness will go on to another existence. It is important that we start with that level of motivation to want to use this life well. So at least we will have good conditions continuing in our next lifetime. So bring this motivation first into your mind, wanting the time we spend to at least create the causes for that, to gain a good rebirth. But besides that result of high status, as it's often called, there are two other results we can attain that the Buddha summarized as definite or certain goodness. If we gain a human rebirth, like this one, it's not definite or certain to continue. This life is impermanent, will come to an end, and there's no guarantee that we will get another good rebirth. So in this next level of the stages of the path, we look at the big picture, the fact that we have been engaged in samsara, the cycle of existence, since beginningless time. And wouldn't it be better to strive to attain that more lasting result, that definite goodness of liberation, freedom from samsara, freedom from being under the control of your karma and delusions? This is the motivation of the person of middling capacity. We're still quite focused on ourselves, but this is a very noble goal to aspire to, wishing to attain your own freedom from samsara, your own state of nirvana. The other result of definite goodness is Buddhahood, enlightenment. That too will be certain to continue for us if we attain it. But moreover, we will have achieved our fullest potential and also be in the position to help others to do the same. This is where we unite that desire to be free ourselves with a desire to free all beings through having genuine love and compassion for each and every one of them, wanting to help them, guide them to achieve their peace, to attain Buddhahood themselves. And then the recognition that to do this, we must work on ourselves. We must develop ourselves to that degree. We must become a Buddha in order to help others to attain that state. And this is the motivation of the great capable being, the bodhisattvas, the beings who are dedicated to the welfare of all others, and a recognition that to do that, we have to work on ourselves. So we're here ideally with that level of motivation. So just take a minute or so to really bring that motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to awaken fully for the sake of others, into your heart, so that everything we do tonight becomes a cause for the welfare of all beings, ourselves included. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin the class. Okay, so again, in the last class, it was mostly introductory to try to get us into the subject, though we did cover some of the material. I briefly reviewed the beginning part. Let me go ahead and put on screen the little outline of the text that I put together in this PowerPoint file. Essentially, we went through after the homage, we went through the preparatory practices. And again, I didn't cover those verse by verse because it's almost 100 verses and it would take an entire evening in order for us to go through that and do it well. And just trying to keep us mostly focused on the actual topics for meditation in the Lam. And so this is something that is important in our practice to have some preparatory things we engage in to accumulate merit, to purify negativities and what have you. I hope you had a chance to read through those verses at least. Maybe I'll check in after this little introduction to see if there are any questions on that. Then we went into the actual practice, which is beginning with what we call the basics. This is the first, 80 verses or so. Um, and we're going to continue our exploration of the first of those two basics, Guru devotion, as it's called here, having a healthy relationship with a spiritual friend, with someone who is in that role of guiding us on our path. And then we'll go on, hopefully tonight, to begin at least the opportune, fortunate rebirth, this perfect human rebirth, as it's frequently called. These are the two preliminary topics that kind of set the stage for what we are going to be then examining in regard to the rest of the Lam Rim. So, Guru devotion itself, this topic is divided into three parts, and we finished the first part last week, the advantages of having that level of confidence and devotion in our gurus, and the disadvantages of not devoting ourselves fully, or in the more severe damages that come about when we actually move away from the guru in terms of not holding them in our hearts, maybe even despising them or having negative thoughts towards them, which of course we should absolutely want to avoid because there are great disadvantages to that. But it is very worthwhile to have those beings that we can rely upon in our lives. So I'm going to talk more about gurus and so on. And then we will go on to talk about devoting ourselves in thought and then in actions. So let me just check in to see if there were any comments or questions from last week, anything that you read, if you did go through the verses that you have questions about. Again, if you did have the time, and maybe you might not have the time, but maybe one day a week, if you have a weekend where you've got a day free and you wanted to maybe do a more detailed practice, you could use that section, the first 96 verses, as the framework for your meditation. And so you would do all of those, and then you would do a meditation on a Lam topic, such as devoting oneself to the Guru, and then go through the individual verses that we've covered in that and meditate on them. And you might not be able to, again, meditate on all of them, but at least a portion that gives you a kind of juicy topic to work with and to think about. Some of the topics we'll go through tonight are definitely in that vein. So I'm hoping that as we go through this text, you can use it as best as you can in between sessions to work with the verses that we've covered, to try to meditate on them. This is what this is sort of meant for. I might mention that, I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but there are what are called glance meditations in Tibetan Buddhism, and most of you are familiar with some of those, such as Lama Tsongkhapa's Foundation of All Good Qualities, or even the Three Principal Aspects of the Path, another text he wrote. Both of those are only about 14 verses long, and they kind of encapsulate the entirety of the Lam Rim. This is a little bit longer than a glance meditation, obviously. We got 425 verses in this text, but it's still in kind of that category to a degree because we, again, are not seeing the real detailed teachings, the underworkings of these particular topics. And that's kind of my job, is to fill in a little bit on the topics that are discussed here. But obviously, even that will be somewhat limited given the time that we have. But that's also part of your responsibility then too, as I mentioned last week, to go to texts like Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, or the Great Treatise on the Lam Rim by Lama Tsongkhapa, or any of these texts that discuss these topics in more detail, and to kind of fill in some of the blanks, if you will. Though we could also, again, at some point in the future, do deeper study of Lam Rim texts that will allow us to have a bit more time to focus on each topic and go into even more detail, go through scriptural citations and various other things that support it. Because all of these things are tools to help us in our meditation. I might mention that Lama Zopa Rinpoche in one of the Light of the Path retreats, which by the way was named after Atisha's text, that's one way of translating that text, lamp on the path or light of the path. Anyway, at these retreats, one of them, he said, the Lam Rim is the real meditation. We shouldn't think that we're studying Lam Rim, but we meditate on something else. This is the real meditation. This is the stuff. This is what we are meant to be focused on in order to develop ourselves spiritually. So I'm hoping again that this can be a little boost to your practice and to your working with this wonderful structure of the Lam Rim as we go through it. So the one thing I mentioned last week was that if we do have a guru that we choose through our own investigation that will we have great confidence in, then we probably won't have the fault of turning away from them and the disadvantages that accrue from that we went through last week. So this is not in our verses, but I thought I would throw it in here, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to kind of go through what we might call our shopping list for a guru. What are the 10 qualities of a perfect Mahayana guru according to the Lam Rim teachings? The first three are having a mind that is first controlled, meaning that we've developed a deep foundation of morality, that the guru, the teacher that we are looking to, has that. Secondly, pacified, meaning that hopefully they also have a level of concentration, or at least some meditative practice that is allowing them to begin to tame their own minds. And then completely pacified, which is the training in wisdom, having at least some understanding of both the conventional topics that the Buddha taught as well as the more ultimate truth of emptiness. Now, again, these three, we don't really see them coming up until we get to the path of the person of middling capacity. Not that morality isn't going to be talked about or what have you, but nonetheless, we do see them presented there as the three higher trainings, the three things that we need to depend upon in order to attain liberation. And of course, they also are applicable in regard to attaining Buddhahood or enlightenment. These are often corresponding to or corresponded to the three baskets that the Buddha taught, the Tripitaka, as it's often called. The Buddha essentially taught Vinaya to give us a foundation in morality, the Sutra discourses, which were to allow us to know how to develop concentration, and then the Abhidharma, which is the third basket, which is the wisdom teachings, that's usually translated as manifest knowledge. So all the Buddha's teachings are to help beings to achieve these three higher trainings, essentially. That again, those accompanied with many other practices on the Bodhisattva path will lead one to enlightenment, but they're essential for attaining liberation. So we want a guide who at least shows that they are kind of grounded in those three practices. That is an important kind of evidence. All the guides that we seek should at least be practicing what they teach, right? If you're, teaching all these things and yet they're kind of going out to bars and doing all kinds of things, behavior that's not so wholesome, well then, we may not want to put all of our money on that person, right? We want somebody who's engaged in the trainings. Makes sense, right? So that's the first three. The fourth one is having greater knowledge than oneself. Of course, this is true with anything. If you wanted to learn weaving, for example, or you've been practicing weaving rugs and what have you for some time, you wouldn't go to a teacher who knew less than you about weaving to learn how to improve your skill. You would want somebody who's been a weaver for many years and developed many other techniques and skills around the art of weaving. So it's the same for Dharma knowledge. We want someone who has greater knowledge than ourselves. The fifth one, we want a teacher, a guide who has perseverance, who actually continues to put effort in and day out into their teaching, into their own practice. I remember my teacher in Italy, Goshi Jampa Gyatso, he would spend hours preparing the texts and the information to be able to teach us every day. It was quite astounding to see his perseverance. Number six, having a wealth of scriptural knowledge. So this isn't just knowledge more than oneself, it's also having a broad knowledge of the scriptures, the main texts that are taught, the understanding of them, and what have you. Number seven, having a realization of suchness. We have talked about wisdom earlier as one of the three higher trainings, but here it means quite specifically the final view of emptiness or suchness, as it is sometimes called. That's because that's the information that we need in order to uproot samsara, to move to enlightenment, progress on the path to enlightenment. We need someone who has a realization of that, ideally, at least a conceptual understanding of it, if not a full-fledged direct realization of it. Now, again, many of these things might not be able to tell by being in someone's presence for just a short period of time. It might come through over years of being around them, investigating them. Um, but again, these are our ideal shopping list of 10. We don't necessarily have to have all 10 to have great confidence in that person as a teacher. Number 8 is being skillful in teaching. I might make a little kind of caveat here, because we have many teachers in our tradition who might not be that easy to listen to, and they might even have difficulty teaching in English language. So many of our Tibetan and Nepali teachers don't have perfect elocution. They don't have an ability to necessarily say the teachings in a way that we would, expect a good speaker in the public world to do. That's not the final measure of the person that we want to put our confidence in. You can tell, even if they lack some of that, they might have very wonderful skills they bring in terms of kind of making connections, bringing various scriptures in at certain times, telling stories that are very relevant to what we're studying. I mean, that is what we're looking for, is a skilled teacher who may not always use perfect language or what have you, but who has the ability to kind of bring it together into a teaching that brings the point home, that helps us to understand what the Dharma is. So these are the sorts of skills we're looking for, not necessarily, having a huge vocabulary and what have you that we might look at in the public world as a good speaker. Number 9, of course, having love and compassion. I mean, this is so important. The heart qualities that make a good teacher someone that we can become close to, that we can actually can be trusting in and feel like they're going to guide us through thick and thin and help us on our path due to their love and compassion. Number 10, having abandoned laziness or discouragement. Again, we saw perseverance earlier, but this is specifically the laziness or discouragement that can happen when students aren't doing everything the teacher wants them to do, right? Because sometimes we don't live up to our teacher's ideals of how we should be practicing. If we have teachers that simply get discouraged, that turn away from us, that say, oh, you're a hopeless case, and they leave us to be, well, obviously that's not a good characteristic. You want teachers who won't get discouraged, who will continue to be there day in and day out, regardless of what the students are doing. That's a practice, indicates a practice of their own patience even as well, that they aren't requiring that students make immediate changes, which of course is also very hard for people to do, but rather that they are going to keep doing what they're doing. I remember when I first became a teacher, even prior to just becoming a teacher at the master's program, I think it was Dakpo Rinpoche, who came through, um, and he said, I want to tell you all, because a lot of us in the room are going to become teachers. He says, being a good teacher doesn't mean that you're going in front of a group and giving something new every time, like the news people, right? Anchor people on the news. Every night you turn it on, and today in the news, blah, 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 blah. There's always something new to say. That's why it's called the news, right? Well, he said being a Dharma teacher is not like that. You give the same thing every time you get up in front of a group. You're talking the same Dharma. Maybe you might talk about different topics, but it's the same thing essentially. This is what a good Dharma teacher does, and that is indicative, hopefully, of their lack of discouragement, that they will keep giving the same teaching, the same medicine, keep trying to get people to take it, even though many people might take longer than what you would ideally like them to take, right? you know, as teachers, I can say from my own limited experience and perspective, I would love for everybody to immediately adopt everything that I say, right? And I would even love for me to be able to adopt everything I say completely, fully. I do my best to work with all these teachings. But that's impossible. We all take time. I remember Lama Yeshe used to say, not that I knew him, but this is a phrase that's been attributed to him, that people aren't like mushrooms. Mushrooms grow up really quick in the kind of damped forests, maybe like in the Northwest and what have you, or in California, some parts of California, especially with all the moisture they've had. Mushrooms will grow very quickly, right? You might go out there one day and there's nothing there, and the next day there's all these mushrooms. That's not what people are like. People don't grow that quickly. People don't develop their qualities that quickly. So again, I'm sorry I'm going on about that one, but I think it's a very important one for us to have in terms of a teacher, a guide, someone who is very patient, who's not going to get discouraged when we don't necessarily live up to their hopes for us in the moment. So hopefully, again, if we kind of look at those 10 qualities, we see that there's a lot of things that we can hopefully assess by being around somebody long enough, can gain an appreciation for what they bring to the table, and we can begin to develop that confidence in them. It is ideal to have some sort of discussion with the person with whom you want to enter into that relationship, though. Not that, I mean, in the old traditional ways, they would be like you have to ask 3 times to be their student, and they might say no the first 2 times, but on the third time they might say yes. I don't know that we are in that age where we have to go through all of that. If there is a teacher who frequents Osel Shenpen Lane or wherever it is that you get your Dharma teachings that you really want to engage in that type of a relationship with, it is ideal to have a conversation with them to say, I'm feeling very confident in you as someone who I would like as my spiritual guide. Is that something that you're amenable to? Because frankly, it is a lot for a teacher to kind of sign up for that. I remember the first time I was asked to play that role was by somebody in the prison where I would go to teach. And of course, when you're dealing with someone who is incarcerated, it's a little different, right? Because they can't go all over the country to try to find a guru. They're stuck in prison. And so I was the one kind of person there day in and, well, not day in and day out because I wasn't going that frequently, but the one person who had some constant role in their life as a teacher. So it is something that people should kind of hear from your side that you want to see them in that role. And then they can decide if that's something they're comfortable with. Many teachers are quite okay with it. They've been sort of on the circuit as teachers in that capacity, so it won't be such a big issue. But I think it's worthwhile having that discussion. Now, once you enter into that relationship, this is where we get into the next 2 topics, which is um, how do we relate to them in terms of thought? And this is kind of in an ideal way. There's going to be 2 kind of topics within that. One of them we can get our heads around pretty easily. The other one, I think it's going to take a little bit of work to get there. The second thing we want to do is dedicate ourselves in terms of our actions, the things that we do. So let's go ahead and take a look at the verses. Let's get into the verses again. So that's what we want to mainly spend our time on. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Okay. So this is verse 114. This starts the section that's called the development of faith, which is the root. And again, faith in this context is the faith in our guru in terms of seeing them through the most ideal lens. So verse 114 says, just as one and the same moon in the sky appears at once without effort, reflected in every body of water in the world, so too my path-showing spiritual friends, says a sutra, are one and the same wisdom knowledge of the Buddhas, appearing at once without effort in the forms of emanation, enjoyment, and other and ordinary gurus before pure and impure tameable beings to tame them. Okay, so I do have to give a little explanation on some of these terms that are mentioned in here. The concept behind this is that just as the moon is again shining in all of these bodies of water, giving the same reflection, there is a wisdom minds of the Buddhas, what we again are going to refer to in just a moment when I show you the slide, as the Dharmakaya. This is the wisdom mind of a Buddha that is fully developed, that has this great compassion for all beings and is trying to help them through whatever means possible. And not even trying, it is from its side doing everything possible. However, we are limited in terms of our own karma. Again, Buddhas can't enlighten us, they can help us to see the Dharma and give the teachings and so on, but they need a form in which to do that. So we have these 2 main bodies of a Buddha, as they're called, kayas. They are the kind of the 2 experiences of a Buddha. One is the personal experience of that Dharmakaya, that wisdom mind. The other is the interpersonal, social experience of that Buddha mind in form. It's called the Rupakaya, often translated as form bodies. And there are different types of form bodies that appear to beings depending upon their level of purity. So here's a little chart of these kayas. Again, sometimes we talk about the two bodies of the Buddha. That's the Dharmakaya and Rupakaya, the truth body, as it's often referred to, and then the form body. These two have two additional kind of divisions within them. So you end up with four kayas if you look at it from one perspective, and then sometimes they leave Dharmakaya as one and talk about the two Rupakaya, and that makes three bodies of a Buddha. Anyway, you'll see different presentations in different contexts. But let me just briefly go over what's on the left-hand side of the screen. This truth body or Dharmakaya, as I mentioned, the main element within it is the Yanakaya, which is the wisdom body or sometimes wisdom truth body. It is the completely perfected mind of a Buddha. It is your own personal experience when you attain that state, and the beings who have attained it have reached the apex of their mental evolution, in a sense. They have brought their minds to that, that ultimate result of complete development, completely purifying everything in the mind that obscures it, completely developing all the qualities. We can talk also about the nature body, the Svabhavika Kaya. This is referring to the emptiness of the wisdom body, the Yanakaya, the fact that that lacks any inherent existence. And moreover, we can also refer the nature body, it has an element of purity, of the kind of purity from all the stains. In a way, we can say it has a natural purity, which is its emptiness, and then the purity of the adventitious stains that has been attained through the Buddha having reached that complete purification. So anyway, this is why sometimes it is just summarized in terms of being the Dharmakaya, when really, again, what we mean by that is the wisdom mind of a Buddha. As I said just a few minutes ago, that wisdom mind does need to have a form to interact with beings. It's too subtle for us to be able to interact with at the level of development that we're at. So the Rupakaya has two different ways that it manifests. One is in terms of a Sambhogakaya, often referred to as the complete enjoyment body. This is a maturation of the Buddha's development on the path to enlightenment that manifests in a pure land where only beings who have purified their minds, and only bodhisattvas specifically who have purified their minds to some degree, can access that level of the Buddha's wisdom manifesting in that form. I won't go into more detail on that, but know that there are also the Nirmanakaya, which are the more common ways that Buddhas appear. Those are what are called the emanation bodies. Shakyamuni Buddha himself is said to have been a supreme emanation body in that he began the turning of the wheel of Dharma in this world system. Very special role that these emanation bodies play. But emanation bodies can be anything, and they can be accessed by any being of whatever level of purity or impurity, depending again upon their karma. So the logic behind what we're looking at in this section of developing faith in our gurus is to see that they are essentially Nirmanakaya. They are the emanations of a Buddha mind. Now, again, this does take some thinking. We're going to look at the reasoning behind this because there is some reasoning that supports seeing them in that way. But understand that when Buddhas appear in that way, they will appear to be faulty to some degree because we can't access them in the fully purified form, that Sambhogakaya form or any other, purified form that would exist. We can only know them through the way that they appear in response to our karma as a direct kind of mirror of our karma, even. So this is one of the kind of elements we're going to be looking at in terms of on the sutra path. This is kind of a good way to begin to frame our minds to look at our gurus. When we get to the tantric path, which is only going to be introduced in the last two verses of this entire text, then it is kind of a requirement to see your gurus as a Buddha. When you enter into highest yoga tantra, in particular, though even other levels of tantra would also be applicable, you ideally hold that view of them as being a Buddha because that's part of the process of receiving tantric initiation from them, is to hold that awareness. But even on the sutra path, there's great benefit to this, and again, there's some reasoning behind it. So we go back to the verse. Again, we see that this is how we are ideally trying to see that our gurus are one and the same, as it says there in 115. They're the one and the same wisdom knowledge of the Buddhas, appearing at once without effort in the forms of the emanation bodies that we are able to enjoy in this world, and the enjoyment bodies in the Pure Lands, that when we develop our minds to a greater degree, we will have an ability to access them. And then it says as a third thing, ordinary gurus, but ordinary gurus are a form of emanation body. They are the ways that Buddhas are emanating. Their mental energy is coming into the world in that physical form. And again, we'll look at the reasoning behind why that can be so, is said to be so. And that's again to tame beings, depending upon whatever level that they are at. Verse 116 says, many tantras in particular teach that at the end of the age, omnipresent Lord Vajradhara himself, which is the tantric kind of Buddha, the essence of all the Buddhas in that form, appears in the form of ordinary gurus and guides degenerate beings. This is actually in the traditional teachings of the Lamrim. This is set out as the first reason why we can have confidence that our gurus are Buddhas, is because in the tantric teachings that the Buddha gave when he was still in this world, he said that in the future, this is how Buddhas will appear. Vajradhara, the tantric essence of the Buddhas, will appear in these forms. Our gurus, the Buddha mind, is a manifestation in that form. Now, again, Rinpoche, and if you've had a chance to look at the book, The Heart of the Path, that I mentioned last week, this book, he explains them in a reverse order. There are 4 reasons that are given. And in the traditional text, the first one is this one, that the scriptures say that this is how the Buddhas will appear in the future, is as your gurus. But there are 3 more reasons. He flips them and he says, let's start with the last reason first. So I want to introduce you to these reasons, and then we'll go to the text and we'll take a look at how they are kind of talked about there. They're not talked about in kind of a linear way, but they're all touched on to some degree. The 4 reasons for seeing one's guru as a Buddha. The first one, which again is the last one in the traditional Lamrim text, our appearances are unreliable. How do we know that what we are experiencing is how things are? They often say that, anybody could be a Buddha, essentially. We just don't know because we might be blinded by our ordinary karmic view. And of course, there are many other examples in the Buddha's teachings where our appearances are deceptive. With regard to emptiness, we are not aware that everything exists in this very subtle way. We instead think that they exist inherently because that's how they appear. We have that false appearance. We'll get into this much later in the text, but this false appearance in regard to how things exist is a product of our own minds. And that is, again, one of the most profound examples of how we cannot trust the world that we live in terms of how things appear and how they exist can be very different at the ultimate level. But even conventionally, we may not be completely aware of how things are. Many people we might have a chance encounter with, we only have maybe a negative thing that happens, and we don't know all the qualities that that person has. We're blind to so much in our world. We're blind to the impermanence of things, that things are constantly changing. This is something we have to think about to get our awareness of, because things don't appear that way. Doesn't, like, I look at my body and my body doesn't seem to be changing moment by moment, but it is. There's not a moment where it stays the same. Everything is constantly changing. This is, again, just indicative of the world that we live in. We cannot trust our appearances. This is one of the main points that we'll go into in the verses. Let's go back to the other ones. This is kind of the starting point, again, according to Rinpoche, and I would really encourage you to read the chapter. I can't remember what number it is in The Heart of the Path, but it's marked something like How to See the Guru as a Buddha. Number 2, the gurus are the agents, the doers of the Buddha's good works. So if we say, okay, we have this potentially false appearances going on, but when we look out at the world around us, even what we have appearing to us conventionally, we see that the gurus are the ones that are doing the Buddha's good works, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. Maybe our politicians are Buddhas too. I can't tell, but I don't see them doing the Buddha's good works necessarily. But if I look at our gurus, what are our gurus doing? His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche when he was with us, and Lama Yeshe before him, and all these great beings who are dedicating their lives to sharing the Dharma, to doing everything they can to help us, dedicating their lives completely. I mean, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I never saw him do anything that even looked remotely like self-centeredness, self-cherishing. He was always doing actions directed towards others. I mean, that's the Buddha's good work, right? That's about being in the world as a guiding light and influence, bringing the Dharma, doing tantric initiations, helping beings in a variety of ways. This is what the gurus are doing. The gurus are doing the Buddha's good works. So makes some sense that they would be the Buddhas. And then third, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are still working for sentient beings, even in our degenerate times we're living in. It's not like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have gone on vacation and said, forget those suffering sentient beings. They're not worth saving. They're not worth helping. They're still working for sentient beings. We often talk about how this analogy of the sun is a useful one to think about Buddhas. Again, when we talk about the Dharmakaya, it's like the sun shining in the sky, and the Rupakaya and the enlightened activities of the form bodies are like the rays of the sun. And whether we receive those or not is up to our own karmic conditions. Just as if, whether you're receiving the sun rays or not, it might depend upon your physical location, whether you're in a cave or under a rock or whatever the case might be. Then you won't receive the full force of the rays of the sun. It's the same with regard to the Buddhas. And Bodhisattvas have developed many abilities along the way to Buddhahood, not as powerful as the Buddhas. But the Buddhas are sending out these waves of enlightened activity all the time, trying to help sentient beings. We are not without their forces in the world. I remember there's a wonderful quote that's been bouncing around on Facebook. I've seen it from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, where he was essentially saying, "You're not alone. You're always within the scope of the compassion and care and concern of all the Buddhas." It's very comforting to think that that's what's going on. And the Buddhas haven't given up on us. They don't stop. They're like the sun perpetually shining. So this is what we are dealing with. We can't trust our appearances. The gurus are the ones doing the Buddha's work. And the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are still working for the sake of sentient beings. So the logical conclusion is maybe I can't trust my appearance, that this is an ordinary being who's aging just like me, who gets sick just like me, and so on. This is an appearance exactly in accord with my karma. And it is the manifestation of the wisdom knowledge of the Buddhas in a physical form to benefit me. Again, it's just an idea to work with. As I said, until you enter Tantra, it's not essential to see the guru in this way. The Lama Zopa Rinpoche and most teachers in this tradition begin to introduce this idea in the sutra teachings that we're going through in the Lam Rim here, so that we begin to get our heads around that idea. As I said, if we look at the rest of the beings in the world, well, there may be Buddhas out there in other forms, who are helping others in a variety of ways. But most of the people that we look at who have pretty high status in this world are probably not exemplifying the sorts of behaviors that we would ideally associate with a Buddha, right? So the gurus are the ones that are most closely aligned with that. So let's go through the verses and we'll see as we go through them, kind of this explanation unfolding in regard to those four things. By the way, the last one again was that Vajradhara said that this is how Buddhas will appear in the form of gurus. So it's this kind of a scriptural source. Not very strong for some of us, perhaps in the West, and that's why Rinpoche reversed the order. So then in verse 117, he says, "Therefore, whatever bodies and deeds they show," meaning that the Buddhas show, "in fact, there's no doubt that all the conquerors of the 10 directions display these taming bodies to guide us into the path of liberation. As for this appearance as of faults," again, that faulty appearance, "the master with all faults gone and perfect in virtues was still seen by Devadatta, like Pakarma and the Tirtikas, these non-Buddhists, as it having a mass of faults." And this is, something that they point out here to give us a kind of the proof in the history of the Buddha. In the Buddha's own life story, there were those who didn't see him as a perfect Buddha, an enlightened being, particularly his cousin Devadatta, who even tried to kill him, sent a charging elephant towards him. And, so even the Buddha was not seen as like being completely pure by everyone in his age. Then it says, "Likewise, through my thick cover of negative karma, like someone with jaundice seeing a conch as yellow, I always perceived the faultless as having faults. Why, just from this, should they really have such faults? For the sake of sentient beings, it's taught, the conquerors show themselves in any form, even such as Maras. Maras are one of the four Maras. Three of them are kind of our own individual internal stuff. The fourth Mara is called the Devaputra, the sons of the gods, and these are beings who can appear in malicious, malevolent kind of forms. And so Buddhas can even appear in that form. So how do I know that this uniform appearance as faulty is not deliberate show like this? That it's actually the best ways for beings, for the Buddhas to appear to us is with faults, because that's what our karma is. That's the way that we need to receive their guidance. You know, they might appear to be faulty, but this is skillful means. They often use this term upaya in Sanskrit. It's the way Buddhas are able to help others by appearing exactly in accord with their karma. Verse 121, while I'm not free of this cover of negative karma, even if all Buddhas come and stand right before me, I've no chance of seeing their supreme bodies adorned with the marks and signs, which are the 80 marks and the 32 signs that indicate an enlightened being, any more than I see them now. It is said that great beings, great practitioners of the past, purified their minds to where they did have access to these ideal forms of teachers appearing before them. Lama Tsongkhapa himself, I think I maybe even mentioned this last week, he had an appearance of his guru in the form of Manjushri, who told him the advice, I think I shared this last week, I should have, that how you will achieve Lam realizations is by, of course, meditating on the Lam, but doing the accumulation of merit and purification of negativities that is so essential, and then making heartfelt requests to your gurus. This is an appearance that Lama Tsongkhapa, through purifying his mind, had before him, that I'm sure if anyone else who hadn't done that work came into the room where Lama Tsongkhapa was talking to this Manjushri, light being that's appearing before him, they wouldn't have seen him. They would have said, "Yeah, well, I don't know. Lama Tsongkhapa is talking to himself in there." But that's what happens in our mind purifies. We actually can have that more direct contact with beings, Buddhas, in that purified state. But what we have the karma for is for beings to appear in a faulty state and having bodies that age and get sick and what have you, just like ours. And this is kind of, in a sense, it's the best they can do, but it's because of our karma. They can do better. They can appear in absolutely pure forms, but we have to purify our own minds to be able to receive that, to enjoy that. And it kind of makes sense. Hopefully, you're seeing some of the kind of logic behind this. Therefore, verse 122, all these apparently faulty aspects of my instructor's actions must be either just my mistaken perception from negative karma, or alternatively, a deliberate manifestation. Right? And we could say they're essentially both. It's a mistaken perception from our own negative karma because that's the best we can do. But it is a deliberate way that the Buddhas will manifest for us, exactly in accord with our karma. Lama Zopa Rinpoche once said, "We are so fortunate that the Buddhas don't appear to us in the form of dogs." We don't have that karma. We have actually the karma for them to appear in the form of human beings that we can learn from. You can learn from a dog. I don't want to put dogs down. They're very compassionate beings, right? They have a lot that they can teach us. But to get the Dharma that is going to get us out of samsara and get us to enlightenment, we need human beings to instruct us. The final verse in this section, therefore, however they may appear to me, in fact, they're free of faults and perfect in virtues, identical with the conquerors, without exception, of all the infinite realms combined in one. Now, I just want to give some brief advice on this. This doesn't mean that we totally ignore the faults of our gurus, and certainly there may be times when we might have to ask our gurus for more explanation of what it is that we are experiencing. But the idea is that we still might end up coming back to that place of saying, well, why are we seeing faults? And we do have this tendency, even with regard to what we think are ordinary beings, right? We're constantly judging and finding faults in all the people we associate with. We need to kind of recognize that that is our default mode. I guess it's kind of a pun there. It's our default mode to find faults, and we need to be more attentive to the positive qualities. Alex Berzin, in his wonderful book, I think it was republished as Wise Teacher, Wise Student, or vice versa. I can't remember the title of it. But he says that it's like if somebody's walking by a window, say you're sitting in your house and you've got a window that's kind of, not all the way down to the ground. You just see the person walking by and you only see, yeah, like their head and their torso. You don't see the lower part of their body. You don't see their legs. You don't kind of assume that they don't have those lower limbs and what have you. You just know that what you are seeing is not indicative of everything that is there. It's similar with our gurus. What we are seeing, what is appearing to us, is like what's more evident to us and is due to our karma. We may not be seeing all the other faults. I'm sorry, all the other qualities. All the other qualities that are there are kind of hidden from us to some degree, but they will expose themselves over time. As we spend more time in the presence of our gurus, we begin to see their qualities. I remember when I first met Geshe Jampa Gyatso in Italy. He came into the room for the very first teaching, and he was very short and just kind of it was very humorous to watch. But I didn't get this like, wow, this being coming into the room that was like piercing my heart or doing anything wild. It was just very ordinary. But the more time I spent with him over the course of 7 years, the more I saw his qualities coming through. And the more that I began to realize that, yes, it's not only that this was a possibility, but this was fact, that I was being guided by an enlightened being in a physical form that, again, is exactly in accord with my karma. That's the first way that we devote ourselves to the Guru, through thought. The second way is to, whoops, I'm sorry, I didn't want to go back to that. The second way is in terms of thinking about their kindness, thinking about the ways that they have been kind. And this one's a little bit easier. We don't have to get our head around all this woo-woo stuff of Buddhas appearing in forms and what have you. Verse 124, not only are these my protectors, thus of the very nature of all the conquerors of the Buddhas, in constantly caring for me with the nectar of holy Dharma, their kindness actually exceeds all the conquerors. They say that because your gurus are actually here teaching you the Dharma, we don't have the good fortune to have been in the presence of Buddha Shakyamuni, or maybe we were just like little insects on the ground in Vulture's Peak or something when he was teaching the Heart Sutra. But we've got the karma to be with these amazing beings who are being kind in giving us the Dharma. Verse 125, it's as when a man is suffering in prison and someone ransoms them from that confinement, then has them taken somewhere full of enjoyments. Certainly that person does that prisoner a great kindness, right? Somebody who actually rescues them from prison and helps them to be free of their confinement. When, therefore, our gurus teach to us the means of escaping from the three ill destinies, this is one of the topics that'll be coming up in a few sessions from now, what we call the three unfortunate states or the lower realms, giving us kindness so that we may enjoy as we wish for a while the glory of the upper rebirths as gods and humans. So this is kind of speaking to the first level. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. How did that go there? I was trying to get it just to go down a little bit, and it went way out of control. Sorry. This very first verse that I just recited of 126 about how the gurus are teaching us, this has to do with the first level of the stages of the path, where the Buddha gave us the teachings that are summarized in that first level as helping us to avoid the ill destinies, the unfortunate realms, and accomplish a good rebirth. Then, secondly, verse 127, when they teach us well the unsurpassed means of quelling all troubles of samsara and nirvana, that's the second level of the stages of the path. The Buddha also gave teachings that help you to attain nirvana and to be free from your own cyclic existence, your own samsara. And then thirdly, they lead us to the supreme state of the three kayas. Again, that's where three kayas is mentioned. That would be the Dharmakaya, the enjoyment body, Sambhogakaya, and then the emanation body, the Nirmanakaya. In what way could this kindness not be great? So we can see that what the gurus are doing for us is they're teaching us the way to accomplish not just a good rebirth, not just our own liberation, but even unsurpassed perfect enlightenment, attainment of the full experience of a Buddha. In what way could this kindness not be great? Our author says. So, if it's taught that the kindness of teaching a single verse could not be repaid by eons of offering equal in number to its letters, how can one measure the kindness of teaching the good path all complete? So we will talk about how to repay their kindness through our actions and so on. But recalling how they've given us so much more than just a single verse of Dharma. Our gurus, His Holiness, who, what have you, have given us unbelievable teachings. The whole path, complete, sutra and tantra. 129. When we go forth from our homes like pits of fire, then in solitude dwell, in a sage's righteous conduct, and taste the supreme taste of the nectar of Dharma. This is the kindness of our precious Guru, kind of showing that when we attain ordination, those who do the lay ordination, certainly of the lay vows, but moreover the monastic ordination of monks and nuns, then that's kind of the ideal thing is when gurus guide you to taking more vows, being more sincere in your practice and what have you. And then verse 130, when we meet the Manjunatha Guru's teaching, which according to that other translation is referring to Lama Tsongkhapa. In that one, it says, because of the kindness of the supreme spiritual protectors, I received and gained confidence in the teachings of the gentle guru protector, Je Tsongkhapa, which are difficult to find even when sought for many thousands of eons. So again, this is also in our verse. It's hard to find these teachings even on searching for thousands of eons, and also find confidence in the method that our gurus teach. This is the kindness of our holy instructors. I might just, mention that this reference to Lama Tsongkhapa, of course, this is a text in the Gelugpa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and Lama Tsongkhapa is singled out as being the most amazing scholar and practitioner who began the Gelugpa tradition. Not that that was his intention, but that's what transpired after his passing was this new sort of lineage that formed the last of the four lineages within Tibet of these schools of practice. And so Lama Tsongkhapa is greatly relied upon. And if you've spent any time investigating Tsongkhapa's teachings, you'll gain that confidence that this is an amazing being who again still had to go through all kinds of purification and accumulation of merit, but achieved amazing realizations in his lifetime. So again, how kind that our gurus are giving us the nectar of the teachings of Tsongkhapa. 131. Therefore, these, my spiritual friends, must be rescuers, rescuing from the realms of woe, sea captains, taking me over the sea of samsara, guides who conduct me to high birth and liberation, doctors who cure the chronic disease of defilements, rivers of water that put out the great fire of suffering, lamps that dispel the darkness of ignorance, suns that show clearly the path to liberation, releasers from bonds in the prison of samsara, rain clouds dropping the rain of the holy Dharma, friends and relatives helping and dispelling harm, and parents always protecting me with love. So this is again just a nice little kind of poetic way to end this section about talking about all the ways that we can look at our gurus as being these amazing protectors, those who are kind of sea captains ferrying us to the other shore of liberation and enlightenment and so on. Um, but again, I would encourage you, if you do, I hope you will meditate on maybe these two sections of devoting through thought. Maybe try to get your head around uh, gurus. Maybe even again, if you don't have someone you consider a guru, those beings who you see as possibly being someone who you might uh, bring into your life in that way, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, what have you. But try to see this possibility that they are Buddhas manifesting in that form. And moreover, just think about their incredible kindness. And they've, again, are dedicated 100% to our welfare. And that was another thing with Rinpoche. I never got the feeling like, I wasn't somehow in the scope of his concern and wish for my welfare. And that was true for everyone that was a follower of Rinpoche, that was a disciple of his. So again, this is ideally the way that we want to think about our gurus, being incredibly kind and also as ideally, at least the emissaries of the Buddhas, if not actual Buddhas themselves. So now we go to dedicating ourselves through actions, devoting through deeds. There are three main ways that are highlighted in the Lamrim text. We will see these coming up to some degree in a part of this section. First is offering material gifts and reverence, which is said to be the least powerful of these three. Know that gurus are very powerful objects for us. So any of these deeds done towards gurus is extremely powerful. But second is offering service, where we actually try to help the guru with the projects they have or the things that they're doing. Um, because the gurus are a manifestation in a physical form in this world. They cannot do everything from that vantage point. So we want to offer our, you know, ability, our time to help them. But the third is the highest, the best way to devote oneself through one's actions by offering your practice, following their advice. Right? That makes the most sense. That's what pleases the gurus the most, is when we actually do what they are asking us to do, when we actually meditate and study and engage in all the practices that will help us to develop our minds into the state of Buddhahood. That's the mind we're developing in terms of our motivation of bodhicitta to be able to help others in that way. So it makes sense that, again, they will be most delighted when we move in that direction, when we actually devote ourselves to that path. So let's go to the verses in this section. I won't comment too much on most of these. I think they're pretty straightforward. But in this way, it says, every worldly, or this word should actually be supra-mundane. Supra means kind of increasing the mundane. Supra means beyond the mundane, above the mundane. That's the qualities we develop when we have realized emptiness directly and so on. So in this way, every benefit is a kindness of the Guru. Although one can never completely repay this kindness, for the sake of gratitude, one should try to please them. Again, I'm substituting them where I can or there, because any gender can be a guru for us. We have these traditional texts that come from, admittedly, a patriarchal kind of view. And so him tends to be the default, even in the English translations. But again, anyone can be a guru for us. Just as one strives to grow seeds in a fertile field, through the guru, though the guru is indifferent to honor, why not strive in respecting this best of fields with offerings and worship to perfect soon my own great accumulation of merit? This is where I was saying the guru is a very powerful field, if you will, for accumulating merit and even purifying negativities. 136, it is taught that revering a single hair of the guru, who's shown one the unerring path, excels in merit, honor, and worship to all the assemblies of Arya hearers, Pratyekas, and Buddha sons, and all the Buddhas. So if you were to make honor and worship to all of these amazing beings who've realized emptiness of the Hinayana paths, the Bodhisattva path, and so on, just revering a single hair of the Guru excels in merit, that amount of positive potential you would have accumulated. So again, the guru is a very, very powerful object. Then it goes into a description of those in the past, and many of the life stories have dedicated themselves and attained great realizations in that way. Many holy men, such as Naropa, Milarepa, Domtompa, Sakyapandita, and Chayopa, giving up body, life, and wealth for their gurus without a thought, won qualities. Therefore, like them, I must strive in the ways of devotion and honor with body and speech, such as offering all my cherished possessions. That's kind of the offering of material goods. That's the least, but nonetheless a good part of our practice. Rising, prostrating, giving baths and massages, praising and speaking respectfully. These are all of kind of showing reverence and honor. Again, still in that least category, but important for us to have this way of honoring our gurus. But far the best way that one's three doors can please the guru is great effort, never idle, day or night, in the stages of the complete unerring path. I must please them by offering practice just as they teach. Please inspire me so that I can do this. And you'll see that almost every section with the long rim topic will end with that kind of wish to receive inspiration to be able to accomplish this. So as you do a practice on these, I mentioned earlier, it's good to spend some time over the next week working with these verses, contemplating them, trying to bring them to mind. And again, some of them may not be as juicy for you right now, and others will be. Well, you're welcome to spend time on those that are juicier for you, that really feel like they're helping you in very positive ways. But make this idea of, once more, requesting blessings. Remember, that was the third thing I just mentioned, that Tsongkhapa was told by Manjushri that's essential to achieving these realizations. The, the Buddhas, if they are Buddhas appearing in these forms of our gurus, they want nothing more than to help us in every way possible. So requesting blessings, kind of aligning ourselves with their energy, is the best thing we can do to create the optimal conditions. It's like we go back to this idea of planting realizations in the soil of our minds. That's like the heat lamp, That's kind of, if we want to get the heat lamp on it to grow things even more quickly, the blessings, the inspiration of the gurus. So that ends the first section. That's actually, again, a meditation topic within the Lam Rim. Let me check if there are any questions before I go on to begin the next topic, which again was the other one in this kind of basic section. Um, any questions or comments on devoting oneself to a guru, relating properly to the guru? Yes, Ruth, please.
Well, I just had a little story that sort of underlines what you were just talking about. And one of the nuns at Sarvasti Abbey was saying she had an audience with Lama Zopa. She was so full of devotion. She said, "Oh, what can I do? What can I do?" And he just looked at her and says, "Practice." So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, going back to like this idea of you can make material offerings to the gurus, I would go at those Light of the Path retreats that I mentioned earlier in North Carolina. Everybody at the end, of course, makes these monetary offerings to Rinpoche, sometimes offering like holy object statues or what have you, but generally all this money. And like Rinpoche, he wouldn't even like look through it. Oftentimes he would just take the pile of the envelopes and he'd say, please give these to the center here, Kadampa Center, who was hosting it, so they can build their stupa or whatever it was. I mean, his whole thing was like just a conduit for this. Resources come in and they just go out, because that's not where his main interest was. His main interest wasn't in how many offerings can I get, how much money can these people give me, and he didn't own but meager possessions. All the things that he had, the houses that people bought for him and so on, were not, he didn't even think of them as his per se. I mean, he just would use them because people offered them. But what makes the gurus the happiest, what pleases the Buddhas the most, is our practice. When we ask the gurus, what do they want of us? What is it that they seek of us? They say, well, I want you to practice hard. I want you to really work on your mind. Rinpoche, for many people, they would go to him and try to get their quote, lifetime practices. I mean, there are preliminaries that we all should do, but sometimes there's specific things that Rinpoche, through his wisdom, could see that we need to kind of focus on. And when you go and, well, again, can't do that anymore with Rinpoche in the form that he was, but when you receive that type of advice, it's just so precious, because it's, again, them sharing something through their insight that will help us to develop, that will create uh, greater conditions that will be conducive to our practice and remove those things that are obstacles for us. So again, we should look at anything our gurus say as much as possible as like take it to heart and run with it. It doesn't mean that, again, if the guru says, jump off a bridge or something, that we should just say, oh, thank you for the advice, I'll go jump off the bridge right now. It's healthy to have a kind of our own discernment. Recall one of the most common things I mention whenever talking about the guru, and I forgot to mention already tonight, is that the role of an outer guru is to awaken the inner guru, which is our own innate wisdom that we can access and develop through engaging in practice. So don't think that, again, it's solely their job to awaken us. It's their job to help us to see our own inner wisdom, our own inner compassion, our own inner power, everything that we have as the raw material from which our whole Buddhahood will develop. So that's the role that a guru is playing. And again, it's just a matter of finding those individuals that we can entrust our lives to, and hopefully we do our shopping well, and then we follow their advice. I think they use this idea of like if you were a blind person that was climbing up a mountain path and you were being led by like a yak by holding onto their tail or something, you would hold on to that tail for your very life, right? Because if you let go, you could fall off into a precipice and, die from, taking a false step or whatever, a misstep. We want that same kind of devotion where we're holding on to the guru. Speaking of this idea of holding on, I'm going to share one little other thing, see if there are other questions. But when Rinpoche taught a whole retreat on Guru Yoga at the very end of the master's program in 2004, one teaching I remember from that, he says that we can think about this whole idea of the gurus being the Buddhas in the sense of this example of a very deep, dark well, that we're at the bottom of. And we're like, we've been in this darkness forever. We've been in the damp, miserable conditions of the well since, beginningless time. The Buddhas are the ones that are on the surface, that are outside the well, and that have the ability to help us, but they need the rope of the Guru. The Guru is like the rope that comes down from the Buddhas into our very place of existence, the bottom of the well. And what I like about this as an analogy is you have to hold on to the rope in order to, and pull yourself out in a sense, in order to get to the state of Buddhahood. Again, the Buddhas aren't, Buddhas, gurus, whoever, are not going to rescue us. They're not our saviors that are going to fly in and save the day. And there we go off to the Pure Lands and enlightenment. The Buddhas and the gurus have the potential to help us. It's up to us to hold on to them, to follow the teachings, to do everything we can to rely upon them, again, through our thoughts and through our actions. So it's another wonderful teaching that Rinpoche gave there that I found really inspiring in my own way of thinking about my gurus, is that they're my connection to getting to the other side. They're what I have to rely upon and hold on to. Any other questions or comments on this topic? I know Ruth, you brought up last week about finding a guru, but that's a challenge. But yeah, were you going to ask something, Melanie? Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask, Don. In,
I
in,
wasn't reading your mind. I just was. Go
well,
ahead.
but in your experience, for people like us who are from communities where we don't have robed people, in our community, what have people done to find a
Mhm.
teacher? Because
Yeah.
this has been like one of those things for a long time for me. I mean, we're looking at like 20 years
Mhm.
of not really having a chance to meet someone that felt like
Mhm.
they were, as you were describing, that person.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. Some of the things I mentioned last week are certainly techniques that we can use at kind of checking up in this day and age that we live in. As I mentioned last week, we actually do have access to at least hearing these teachers online, through YouTube and all these various, places, centers that post their own videos, what have you. We can access gurus from a distance and kind of check up. There also are certainly teachers that come through. I know we had the pandemic where like nobody was coming through and no travel and what have you. It's picking up now. We're having teachers that are going around to more centers and what have you. There's folks like Geshe Sherab, who you all have hosted. There certainly is Venerable Children, who's not that far away at Sravasti Abbey. Many very, very qualified teachers. Whether you feel a karmic connection with them or not and can see them in that light is your own situation. You have to maybe look at that. And sometimes those are how things happen. Somebody comes through and we feel a different kind of shift in our practice and in our heart. I remember Venerable Amy Miller said that her relationship with Choden Rinpoche started just on him coming to Vajrapani, I think it was, where she was director. And the minute she was in his presence, she just felt this incredible shift in her heart. She'd been around, many other lamas, but this was like somebody she knew. She had to follow more closely. And so those kind of personal experiences do matter to some degree. Yes. I mean, we can watch people on a video on YouTube and what have you for many hours, and yet being in their presence is always going to be a little bit different. So, again, might mean that we have to do whatever possible to get those folks to come through. If we do have particular teachers we feel an attraction towards or what have you, come visit Missoula, come, teach for a short while. It's a lot to undertake and can, be quite a large endeavor to bring these lamas into centers and what have you. But otherwise, we just get on our butt, off our butt, sorry, and get on a plane and, travel, go see the gurus. I mean, some people do have the leisure of maybe spending some years hanging out in Dharamsala, or even months or what have you, whatever time they have, or going to Kathmandu, hanging out at Kopan and all these other places. I mean, those are certainly ways that you can, if you do have the time and resources to be able to do that. But I think from our own, you know, vantage point, we can begin that process of seeing who are beings that kind of interest me based on the way they teach, based on the feeling that you get when you're in their presence, well, not necessarily presence, but even watching them on YouTube or what have you. I don't know that I don't really have many more ideas beyond that, because I think once more it's not a matter, like I said last week, of sitting in your house and just waiting for the guru to knock on the door, because that just isn't how it works. I think I mentioned that phrase last week that they often have: when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But it's not that magical, folks. The idea is that as we take an interest, we have to perhaps go outside of our house, outside of our city, outside of our, state, even perhaps, to find these teachers, to try to connect with them in a more direct way. I know His Holiness Dalai Lama says ideally, I think this is from the Guhya Samaja Tantra, that you're supposed to spend like 12 years checking up a teacher. Well, who has 12 years, checking up a teacher? That's a long time. But His Holiness said that's not absolute. If you have a teacher that you have developed some heart connection with, then, email them, talk to them, do whatever you can to reach out to them to see if they're in a position and would like to take you on as a student, and for you to take them as your guru. Um, at some point, we perhaps, again, I'm not trying to encourage people to make decisions too quickly, because that's not a good thing. But I'm also not wanting people to be like kind of just sitting back and being very laissez-faire about it and just letting the world go by and the time go by, and then we get older and older, and eventually we go, okay, then what did I really do? You can still practice the Dharma to a great degree without a guru, but certainly to get tantric empowerment and to kind of have that direct connection to these lineages, to the Buddhas and what have you, is important. It's not something that we can just brush aside and say, oh, well, that isn't happening. I don't need to pay any attention to it. We put what attention we can into it, recognizing that it is an invaluable part of our practice. It's the very first verse of that prayer, that short prayer by Lama Tsongkhapa, foundation of all good qualities. The kind and venerable Guru is the root foundation of all good qualities. And that's the very beginning lines of it, is that that's the root of our practice. Those are the beings that have the most direct influence on us and our practice and behavior. So we want to find them. We want to seek them out. I remember John Landau shared that when he was quite young and traveling with a friend in India and Nepal, this person said to him, there are these amazing beings out here, and it's our job to find them. And I kind of like that. I mean, like, say that that's sort of our job. Our job is to connect with these amazing beings. And they aren't all gone. Like what was said in that point, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are still working for the benefit of others. We have to kind of keep putting ourselves out there and try to find those magical, wonderful beings that are doing the work of the Buddhas that we feel this connection to. I don't know. I don't have much more to say beyond just trying to inspire you to kind of hold that vision, hold that view. There are prayers that you can recite, such as calling the guru from afar, which, if it's somebody who you don't have a connection with, it's pretty afar. But the idea is to make those prayers, seeking the gurus to be in our lives more directly. Maybe I'll try to find a copy of that prayer and get it to Colleen. She can, distribute it to everyone. But it's important from our side that we do whatever we can, once more, to remove our own negativities or purification, develop our own merit through accumulating practices, and keep making requests. We keep making those heartfelt prayers of having the gurus, but then do the work too. Get out there, pound the pavement, whatever you need to do to try to find these beings who you can rely upon. Thank you for the question. Sorry, I can't give more advice than that.
No, that is inspiring. Thank you. That's-
Okay, good. Anyone else, anything before? We don't have too much time left, but I at least want to introduce the next topic. Again, most of you have heard this topic before, the perfect human rebirth. In fact, there is a whole book of teachings by, just like we have the heart of the path on relating to the guru. There's a book called Perfect Human Rebirth by Rinpoche, published by Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. I'll send the link to Colleen so you have that. Let's go to the slide and look at the main topics that are taught in this. Oops, so I had two quotes that I wanted to share with you on guru devotion. Let's look at this. One, we should examine our own manner of devotion to the spiritual friend. If we find it is good, we should rejoice and set our mind continually that way. If, on the other hand, we lack confidence in our guru and regard them lightly, we must contemplate the meaning of these teachings so as to correct our attitude. This was Geshe Rabten at the tail end of that section in the book, The Essential Nectar, that again, we've drawn the translation that we're using from that book. Then from Rinpoche, from that book that I mentioned, The Heart of the Path. As we develop our Guru devotion more deeply and strongly, we purify more of our obscurations, and any Lamrim meditation we do makes great sense to us. Our mind is no longer hard like a rock, but extremely soft. With any meditation we do, we feel confident that if we really tried for some weeks or months, we could generate the realization of that meditation. What were mere words in the beginning, we now feel strongly from our heart. So this is Rinpoche kind of talking about the results of all of that. If we do engage in this practice of devoting ourselves to the gurus, we might see this in our own practice, that the realizations come much more easily. Our minds become much more pliable. So now we go to the opportune, fortunate rebirth. We'll just spend a little time on this before we conclude tonight. There are three main topics that we're going to look at in this, and there are verses that apply to each of these and even subheadings for each of these. The first is recognizing it. In other words, what is entailed in having this so that we actually see the qualities that we possess. The second is thinking about the great value of it, that this is something that has immense value and is such a rich opportunity that we would be foolish to not take advantage of it. And then third, we also need to remind ourselves how rare it is to obtain this. And there are a number of things that go into that teaching so that we, again, don't take it for granted and think, oh, well, I'll do this in my next life. Well, your next life may not be a human rebirth as ideal as this one, may not even be a human rebirth. So that's the three topics that we're going to be looking at. The first thing that we'll go into are these 8 freedoms or leisures. I'll go through these next week. I won't include these in the slides for tonight. Probably not even anything on this topic because we didn't really go into it that deeply. But in the text, we begin by looking at these 8 freedoms and what are called the 10 endowments or opportunities. The 8 freedoms are things that we are free of in the existence that we have, that we aren't born as an animal and so on, all these other states of existence where we wouldn't have the potential that we possess in this human life. The endowments or opportunities are the things that we do have in our lives. It's just kind of looking at it from 2 different perspectives. What we're free of, what we have the leisure because we didn't end up in those unfortunate situations, or what we actually possess by virtue of having good faculties, mental sense faculties that allow us to learn and to process the Dharma, and so on. All the other conditions that are so ideal. And this first topic of these is to really inspire us to say, you are richer than you think you are. You are rich beyond belief. We go through our lives feeling so kind of, we've got a self impoverishment attitude where we don't think we have that much. Well, you are endowed with unbelievable qualities just having this perfect human rebirth. Not just a regular human rebirth. That's the one distinguishing thing. We're not talking about the almost 8 billion beings on this planet who are born as human. We're talking about a small percentage of those who actually have the ideal conditions and the ideal mindset to engage in spiritual practice. So this is something that we should be, jumping up and down with joy for. I remember Rinpoche when he was teaching, and this is another Light of the Path retreat. He said that one time he was watching, he called it football because that's what they call it in the rest of the world, what we call soccer in the US. He said he was watching a football game, And all these people were like this when they got a score, when they made a goal. And he says we should be doing this every day. Like we should be like this at having our human rebirth every day. So this first meditation is to help us to have that kind of joy, and we're again rich beyond belief. The second one is to remind us that this is something we have to use because there's incredible value within it. And then thirdly, don't take it for granted because it's not that easy to get. Might be easy to get a human rebirth in some way because of the 8 billion plus. But when you compare, I don't know the number of creatures on this planet that coexist with us. When you include all the creatures in the waters of the world that are the larger part of this world, and include all the beings in the air and the insects and the worms and the mammals and everything else, I'm betting it outnumbers the human beings. And so we don't kind of get that it's actually quite rare to be reborn as a human, much less a human with these ideal qualities. So this is what we're going to move into next week. That was just a little introduction to kind of whet your appetite for that. But over the next week till next Tuesday, best to work with the teachings we've gone through on faith in the guru, that we're calling the kindness of our gurus. And again, even if you don't have a being who is in that role for you now, you can use someone like Rinpoche or His Holiness and think about their incredible kindness, because we, without a doubt, have benefited from those beings in this world, right? We wouldn't have this center. Soshen Penling wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the kindness of His Holiness and Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, right? So let's do our dedication prayers and conclude for tonight then. So let me pull up the other file here, the prayers for teachings, and go to the dedication prayers. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then this prayer that is so important, that we cultivate this aspiration, this wish for our bodhicitta to just keep growing, to just becoming larger and larger, more encompassing of all beings, with the greatest aspiration for their benefit. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then, talking of His Holiness, we should, from our side, because it's up to our karma, we should be creating the causes for His Holiness to continue to be in this world and for His wishes to be fulfilled, because this rests on us. If this is a Buddha appearing in this world, there's no intention to leave, no intention to, abandon us, but we have to create the causes for His Holiness as well as other spiritual guides to be here by reciting prayers such as this, dedicating in this way. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then, of course, the same holds for Rinpoche. He showed the aspect of passing about a year ago, but he is, there's no intention that that energy that is Lama Zopa Rinpoche that appeared in this world is absolutely intent upon reappearing in this world. We have to create the causes from our side. So let's recite this prayer for that, the verses that are about wanting that swift return. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And let's dedicate for those beings that we're holding in our hearts, those who we know who are experiencing obstacles, illness, or those who have died recently or might even be dying at this time. And even parts of the world where there's great strife and suffering due to man made or natural causes. Send this positive energy out to those beings and think that it becomes the cause to immediately and fully remove all of their suffering, and also to create all the causes that help them to develop themselves into the perfect pure state of a Buddha. And may this happen as well for all beings through what we've done here tonight. Thank you all again. I'm really enjoying teaching this text to all of you. I hope you're enjoying studying it, and wish you all the well for the next week. I'll join you again next Tuesday. I might mention at this time that we will have one Tuesday off. That's the next one after that when I'm on retreat. But then I'll be back again. I think it's like the 14th or something. But next week, definitely tune in, and I'll be here, barring any gross acts of impermanence. All right, everyone. I hope you feel better, Bill. Thank you. And Colleen, thanks for all your support. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, John.
Done.
Okay, you're
Thank you so
welcome.
much.
All right, everyone. Practice well. See you next Tuesday.